Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Lead Forensics webinar. Is your attribution strategy sabotaging your growth? I'm Dawn Upton, and I'll be hosting today. And today we're really fortunate to be joined by Mat Morrison of Digital Whisky. Mat, thanks so much for coming along. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and Digital Whisky, please?
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me on. So I am the strategy partner at Digital Whisky, and Digital Whisky is a very specialized marketing, advertising, data agency that only works with the professional services sector and a little bit with the financial sector. And I've been working in advertising strategy for about 30 years now. Latterly, I made the move from consumer into B2B, and it's been the most exciting change I've ever made in a career. So it's been a good few years.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And what about Digital Whisky? Can you tell us a bit about that, please?
Sure. So we were set up. We noticed that in the sectors that we were working, we saw this opportunity because we could see there was generally among the large international firms a lot of market consolidation. The services that they offer are often undifferentiated. It's hard, it's not easy to say, oh, well, this company does this, whereas that firm does that. They offer a wide range of relatively commoditized services, and they have all historically sold themselves on business development has all been based on personal relationships. They tend not to have sales teams. They will have a biz dev team, but a lot of what really matters is this personal relationship. And across the board, we have seen for the last 10 years at least, particularly as new entrants come in from the big consultancies and accountancy firms and tech players, we see this downward pressure on pricing. So when we see that commoditized services, downward pressure on pricing, that's typically a huge signal that this is a marketing where advertising and brand distinctiveness really matters. And I think, to go into, I suppose, a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today, outside the big four, you see very limited investment in brand building, which is, it's startling. We see more investment in very short-term strategies that don't address this key challenge of distinctiveness, awareness, preference, all of the things that we'd expect to see from sophisticated marketers. And the more we looked at it, the more we learned, the more we worked in the marketplace, we realized that the marketers who work in this sector, and B2B marketers in general, they know the problem, they understand the challenge, and they understand they aren't unaware, but they face certain really extraordinary challenges, internal structural challenges that force them to prioritize activities that have short-term demonstrable effects. Doesn't matter what those demonstrable effects are. So they're abandoning what they know is right for what will make the graph go up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's great. So, I mean, sort of leading into that first question then of what is at stake for teams that can't tie their marketing efforts to real business outcomes?
I think that's the thing. I think people are tying effort to outcome, but they're not tying it to the outcomes they know they need. So obviously the main thing is, the main challenge is always securing some kind of budget. But if you can't demonstrate the real value of marketing, you begin to misalign your OKRs, your KPIs, whatever you want to call them. If you can't get what you need, you will begin to focus on what you get. So the platforms will give you a lot of metrics about engagement or follower growth or whatever it is, but that has nothing to do with your core strategy. And that will typically, what we see that means is people begin to allocate the limited resources they have to the platforms that give them the best numbers back. And an obvious example for that would be LinkedIn engagement. Is LinkedIn engagement something that is relevant to your business, or is it just a number that you can make go up or down? And I think particularly relevant to our conversation, the conversations that we've been having with lead forensics over the years, it's the web traffic that doesn't come from your prospects or relevant clients. So I've got a really stupid example of this. Years ago, when everyone had blogs, I had a blog because we had to have blogs, and I had my own blog, and I would see the traffic go up and to the right, and that was great. And one day I published, just because I published instead of publishing about advertising strategy, which honestly nobody cared about, I published just a quick how-to that I'd worked out on how to do something with PowerPoint. And that rapidly became this huge, I mean, that got all the Google traffic, and it was great. But the temptation then was to write more stuff about PowerPoint, whereas I needed to tell stories about advertising. So big audiences are very sexy and very distracting, but actually understanding small audiences that are highly relevant is more important.
Yeah, really interesting. That's a great example. It's like, we all want all the traffic, but as you say, if it's not relevant, then it's a bit of a waste of energy, isn't it? So,
exactly.
So why do you think attribution then is such a major pain point for B2B marketers in particular?
Well, I don't know about all B2B marketers, but I can say that for our audiences and our clients, the journey is really complex and quite long. You have very small audiences. You'll have a group of people in a potential client organization, but those audiences may be a big audience for us is 20,000 people, which is ridiculous when you compare it to the audiences I work with in consumer, where we're just like, we may as well hit the whole country. The lead times are extremely long. There's no transaction that happens online or on the website or on app. So all of the attribution tools that have been designed and a lot of the methodologies that have been designed on the consumer side, either big market mix modeling and econometrics projects for TV-based advertisers, to the transactional attribution that you might see on an e-commerce or D2C, don't easily translate into our sector. And yet, those are the tools that we have. We will be putting in the tools that are built for a different sector and trying to squeeze our marketing into the models that they've built. It's expensive to do surveys. So the thing that I would obviously most be liking to do is to be doing big survey projects to understand awareness, preference among target audiences. But we can't do that in the way that we can do it for social, for consumer. And Yeah, so it comes down to small audiences, offline transactions, relationship building, which isn't necessarily picked up in the tools that are available to the marketing team. And it takes the period between initial contact to deal signed is very long, and it's hard to make those hard to attribute.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, we know that B2B journeys often span sort of multiple channels and touch points. So, sort of thinking about that, I guess, like how can marketers begin to map and measure like this sort of complexity effectively?
So the I think again we are often tied too much to this idea of the individual actor within our client organization. So our models, our data models that we have inside B2B businesses are typically centered around CRM, let's say, where we have an email address and a set of behaviors and events that are tied to that email address. Um, in consumer, we have a cookie which we will try and match across the user's multiple devices. Usually there'll be at least 2 devices and at least, I don't know, I mean, dozens of browsers for that. But we try to match cookies there, build up a sense of how did this transaction relate to everything we did across these things. Now, that if you start trying to create a version of that, watching the individual user across multiple transactions and touch points, you're on a thick ear to nothing. So instead, we try to create this relatively simplified data model where we actually throw away far more data than we keep. Certainly the platforms give us. We create a model, a strategic model of what we think our marketing efforts are trying to do and how they feed into each other and their proximity to the transaction or to the relationship. So, for example, I mean, a silly example might be, yeah, at one end, LinkedIn advertising is quite a long way away from the transaction, whereas a client attending an event at our offices would be relatively close because we have face-to-face engagement. So what we do is we build this model out and then track key client exposure at each stage where we can. We know we're missing we're going to lose huge amounts of data, but we should be used to losing huge amounts of data. I mean, most of our clients have been losing 60% of their Google Analytics traffic since they went compliant. So build this sort of model, track what you can, and then use that to build a custom attribution model, something that you can say, this is working, we need to increase this, whatever it is.
Sure. And then when sort of looking at that evaluation, would you say that there are sort of hidden touch points that marketers tend to overlook when they're evaluating their return on investment?
Let's talk very briefly about return on investment. Return on investment is often couched in terms of how many email addresses did we capture with this PDF report that we put out. That's a great example of one of those misaligned OKRs that I was talking about earlier, filling your but there are some, and there are some that we are really anxious to solve, and we haven't necessarily. But the one we haven't solved at all, even although we work really hard on it, is exact visibility on LinkedIn. There's a lot of work that's going into personal LinkedIn profiles and activity, which is just not captured. There are some tools now that we see for doing that, but it's hard to get that into a model. But events and webinars often sit in separate platforms and are not counted alongside everything else. PR coverage is a definite pointer. We see spikes around positive and negative PR coverage, but we don't track anything about that. And then I think the thing where we are seeing exciting stuff is looking at website visits by type of content. So, and this is I think an interesting point that we got into for a while, was that our clients typically see their content marketing efforts as a way of demonstrating their expertise and cleverness around certain topics. You know, whether it's AI or crypto or whatever it is that they're writing about this year. We see it much more as a way of identifying what your audience is interested in. And that is so much more exciting. You know, so we started off by building retargeting groups around certain categories of content. But again, the problem is sometimes they're writing about PowerPoint. Yes, no, it's not. But I mean, yeah, for that earlier example, I mean, we have one client who mentioned the word war once in their in an article, and that one gets an awful lot of traffic from, yeah, highly unlikely it's their clients. And so that ability to tie client organizations to content interests is a really exciting one for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you think that then, sort of thinking about that site traffic and that site sort of visit data, how can that help sort of bridge the gap then between the online engagement and revenue?
I don't know whether we can. So I think we come at lead forensics product service from a very different angle, I suspect, than from most. So we're not using it in a purposeful way in order to identify prospects who can then be followed up. As I mean, we offer that as a side service, but typically the people who can do that would be coming to you directly. They have a sales function in place that can actively use information that they get from site visit data. Whereas we are much more, we use it sort of the other way around. We look at the deals that have been signed in the last quarter, and then we track back to see who has been on the site and when, and who has been contacted on email and when, and who's been contacted on through LinkedIn advertising and when, and all of these things, who's attended webinars. And we look at all of those touch points, and then we can build a explanatory model which begins to value different channels relative to stage and journey. Now, this is good for you, it's good for us, but what we have typically seen is that while advertising does the heavy lifting in terms of reach and frequency and onboarding, getting people the first touch, the closer one gets to a deal being signed, we're working on monthly data, not weekly data. But the closer you get to a deal being signed, the more likely you are to see website traffic. And so we can almost, we haven't yet got to the point where we predicted a deal, but it's you can see that there is predictive value here.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I guess like the use case you have for it is almost, it's very different to what, as you say, a lot of our customers, how they use lead forensics. So it's interesting. It's so interesting though, from an attribution perspective, isn't it? Of you can see when you look back, you've got a deal when you can look back at when they visited your site, what pages they looked at, and as you say, in future, it enables you to almost predict that.
Predict.
Okay,
It is
these businesses
invaluable.
are showing these patterns.
It's exactly, and that's. I mean, eventually we hope to have enough data and across enough clients that we can begin to sort of create some kind of generalized model. But I should say that we fell into this, and the reason we started talking to lead forensic in the first place is we had a client who was they were a biotech firm. It was during the pandemic. They were looking for an acquirer. They wanted to sell it to a SPAC. They had about 40 SPACs they were talking to and doing a road trip. You know, this was the big sort of beauty parade. So they were taking their business, having the meetings. And we were supporting this heavily with that very targeted advertising. We had this group of 40 potential acquirers, and we were making sure that the news was always in front of them. And afterwards, we were able to see, we knew who'd bought them. After they were acquired, we knew who bought them, and we were able to just look back out of just curiosity and see their activity relative to specific meeting dates. And we know, and this is the thing that needs to change in people's heads. There is a guy who ran the SPAC, one person, one email address, but he was not the one, who was visiting the site. He wasn't the one who was being exposed to the advertising. It was, he had people for that. And we were making sure that we were in front of the whole organization. And that kind of whole organization, key client, account-based marketing, however you want to think of it, that kind of approach is so much easier to model for attribution than anything else.
Absolutely. And that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That the B2B buying cycle there's so many more decision makers now than there's ever been. Like, it just keeps getting bigger, yes. Doesn't it? The average number of people you have to influence, because it's your decision makers, but it's their influencers and stakeholders and things. So yeah, it definitely makes a difference.
You in the old days, you could look at car ads, and you could see how car messaging, just the auto manufacturer's messaging, was changing to reflect a different decision-making unit inside households. Instead of, if you look at the old stuff, it's sold to the primary purchaser, who was typically the father. And then rapidly you got this stuff where you could see, and it's good for, and it's good for the children, or the children. It was and if you go to the cinema today and watch car ads, look at how they struggle with really small DMUs, tiny, 4-person DMUs. But we're looking at, just the number of people who can block a deal just because they've never heard of you. And they have heard of somebody else. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so sort of moving on from that then. So we know obviously that everyone is really, really busy, and we talked there about some various different things that you can track, but without getting lost in sort of analytics overload, what practical steps do you recommend that people use when sort of building actionable attribution models?
First of all, step outside the data you have and think about the data that you want. So you start with what your objectives are, and then find a key result that supports that objective, rather than starting with the numbers that you're given and then working out what your objectives are. I mean, it is crazy how the number of people we've seen say, increase LinkedIn engagement as an objective is almost sort of comical. Identify key data sources where you can, that have some kind of company identifier against them. You want, that kind of company level identifier is going to be the most important thing. And as I say, we throw away an awful lot of data when we're building these models because they don't come with an easy way of identifying the company. That's kind of important. Don't get caught up in individual level identifiers like emails or cookies or logins, but domain level stuff. And then use a very simple model to begin with, just looking at just, I mean, nobody wants to know about regression models, but basically it's just a series of regression models. You don't need anything much. So you want to take it outside your CRM platform and into some kind of really lightweight data warehousing. This is good for you. This is good for everything. To ignore just the attribution. This is going to be good for you generally, particularly because, say, for example, LinkedIn only lets you keep a year's worth of data. Sometimes, depending on which metric you're looking at, sometimes that can be 90 days and you lose data. Google will dump stuff after about 14 months. You lose. You need to have. If data matters to you, if you think of yourself as a data-led organization, begin to take ownership of the data points that you care about. And when I say simple, you can probably do a lot of this in just Google Sheets, either exporting or using a tool like Funnel or Supermetrics to fill data in there. I'm not saying you need to get a big sort of complex BigQuery or Snowflake data warehouse. Just Google Sheets is a good place. I think that's it. It's have a clear sense of what you're doing, collect only the data you need, keep it forever.
And then if someone wants to create like a single source of truth for their marketing activity, what data sources should they then prioritize if that's their goal?
We're really biased on this, but so we would say CRM data, obviously. LinkedIn Campaign Manager. I mean, you should have evolved into some form of LinkedIn advertising by now, just given the opportunity that's on the table for both paid and organic. There's a little bit of stuff you can see in Campaign Manager on your organic reach of your key clients, but paid is where you'll see that go up. Site visit data, we recommend and work with Lead Forensics because it works well for our needs, but that site visit data is key. Your email marketing platform, which is somewhat different from your CRM data, and then your webinars and events. That sort of group of 5 is nearly always what you need.
Yeah.
There may be other bits.
Yeah, no, great. And then what does great sort of key client reporting sort of dashboard look like in action? So how does it help align marketing with like overall business goals as well?
So we have this thing where we separate our dashboards out from our dashboards have measures that we can change on a regular basis, and our reports are much more thoughtful and considered, and a bit more sort of like 10,000 feet. The report tells you what happened, and a dashboard says, this is what you need to do. But this is what we'd probably include all the time. We'd have client exposure across each channel by client, the ability to filter that by client name and by client grouping, identify gaps and opportunities in that engagement. Where is it going to be easiest for you to, this client is core to our business, and yet they have only been exposed this much over the past whatever. You'll find, and we are an ad agency, so we are going to say this. you'll find that it's hard to massively increase your exposure by increasing the frequency of emails, whereas it's relatively straightforward with advertising. And then we've experimented a lot with different visualizations to make it really obvious to stakeholders who aren't involved in the day-to-day what this means and how this compares. And that's those are the big opportunities.
Okay, great, thank you. So we can't obviously have a webinar without asking the question about AI and machine learning. You did touch on it earlier briefly. So I'm interested to know how you see emerging trends like AI, machine learning, everything to do with that, sort of changing the way we measure marketing success in the near future.
We're quite a cautious adopter of AI in the organization, but we certainly don't have anything where it's doing anything other than supporting us. It's not making in any way like sort of decisions or valuations on its own. What we do use it for a lot, though, is for helping us build out attribution models, because the code it produces very good code very quickly. We have a lot of very non-standard. I mean, every time we go to a new engagement, the requirement is slightly different. So we don't have like this huge code base that works across all clients. So we're just producing bespoke code very quickly. Now, we for that sort of thing, a few years ago, we'd have had to have hired at least one, maybe more data scientists. Actually, now we can just the data engineering function can just take that, run with it, produce code very quickly to run bespoke attributions. But the thing that we were surprised about that came up, which we weren't expecting, has been really useful. We used to do a lot of manual labor creating data transforms, because we'd have a client, companies, when we're trying to match by company name, often those company names, let's say in a CRM database, are entered differently. So my example is always Goldman Sachs comes up as GS, Goldman Sachs Private Equity Group, Goldman Sachs Asset Management, GSAM, whatever. These you have all of these different versions of what for us really, for most of the time, is an organization. And we used to have to just create these lists every time we found a new one. It's like map this to that, map. Actually, we're finding that the machine learning tools are a lot faster at that and produce the data transforms a bit faster. So that feels like our first one where we're almost letting go and letting it do what it does. But but for us, we just don't have a big need for, let's say, content generation or any of those things. So that other agencies might. So this is good.
Interesting, yeah. So sort of thinking about going back to sort of the attribution tools then, for someone who wants to start small, what's the first step to getting buy-in from leadership for introducing more robust attribution models and tools?
We've done it a few times, and we've learned a lot by accident as much by anything else. And so the first great accident that we came across, we had a client. She was the global client lead at a big firm, and we were, in order to demonstrate to her the value of LinkedIn advertising, where and how good our targeting capability was, we hived off a small portion of the budget and said, okay, for this, this targeting the same audience, we will run a LinkedIn lead gen ad against them just to sample the audience. We weren't trying to generate leads. We were trying to just put names to the audience. And when we showed her the list, she was able, of people who did sign up for it, she was able just to look at it and go, oh, yes, we're talking to them, haven't talked to them for a long time. I know that person, had lunch with her last week. And it was extraordinary. Partly it was extraordinary just because of her memory, her absolutely extraordinary memory for all her clients. But also it made it real for her. And it took a bunch of, so if we could have told her, yeah, we hit this many people in this category, this many people within this job description, and that would have been a bit of a sort of anonymous data point where she doesn't know what's good or what's not good. She doesn't know whether it's, yes, it's better than last time we did it, but so what? But here it's like, no, this is this person and I know that person. And it's the same thing when it comes to damn companies. It's like, Pete looks at our lead forensics on a daily basis and says, oh, well, I spoke to them last week, got a call with them coming up. These people are new. I wonder, are they going to send me an email, sort of thing? It's so much more concrete and meaningful when you know who these people are. And so, the obvious approach is to demonstrate. I mean, this is what we would do as an external coming in. We demonstrate the limiter, and it would work for somebody coming into a first 90 days type role, but it's harder to do for yourself. You would need an external consultant to do this. You demonstrate the limitations of your current reporting. You start with a little pilot project, focus on specific objective. You show quick wins on client level reporting, and you tell stories about this is, here are our 5 key clients. This is what's been happening to them, and we think that these guys are underrepresented, these guys are overrepresented, we could move stuff around, or whatever it is. It's the more you can have some anecdotal even photographs of people. It's like for consumer, we use vox pops when we're trying to persuade clients to do things. You go on the street with a camera, you interview people about their brand, and then you put that into things, saying, well, this is what they think of you. Now that's far more compelling normally and an awful lot cheaper than doing real market research. Now, real market research is in fact more robust, but if you want to persuade somebody, that vox pop matters, and find the equivalent of your vox pop, your anecdote, and that gets a sign in. Cool.
Brilliant. Okay, and then from sort of thinking about how marketing teams can use these insights then to adjust sort of budgets and allocate resources, plan campaigns more effectively, how can they apply this information?
I think it can be quite revolutionary. But again, biased. We see that people overinvest in what they perceive to be free resources. So organic, typically. Creating blog posts, creating LinkedIn posts, creating whatever it is. And it tends to lead them to focus on output rather than results. And those free content marketing based products take a lot of time to create and to manage, an awful lot of time, and far more time than I think the organization really understands. I mean, until you ask a senior partner to write a post for you, at which point they tell you that it's their time's valuable, but they don't. That time and resource is a challenge. So we see a lot of overinvestment in content creation at the expense of, and this is to us hugely important, content promotion, or taking people, or even then bringing people to your message rather than taking your message to the audience, which we
Yeah.
see as being more efficient. So when you start focusing on who and less on how many, PowerPoint example, it creates a huge change in the way that you think about your whole marketing organization and what you want to do. So what it lets you do is it lets you shift budget to, or create the case for shifting budget to higher performing channels once you know what the performance is, or put a value on that performance. Lets you ask for budget, lets you allocate resources based on client engagement gaps, and also if you really are deep into the ABM, key client type approach to marketing, it lets you look at what those content interests are and begin to give your partners or your BD team or whoever it is something to go to the client with. Just recommendation always is don't be spooky. So don't say, I see that you've been looking at it's just more, we've been looking a lot at, so that's interesting, so have we.
Yeah. Interesting. And then what does success look like once you implement a better attribution model and approach? Like, how quickly can teams start to see tangible results from that?
We don't have that sort of nice, easy turnaround on stuff. But we've been doing it for, this hasn't been, we're a relatively new company. We don't have enough road behind us to, but I think it's hard to show predictive benefits at the moment, but on the much more positive approach, our ability to attribute or demonstrate marketing's involvement in the process is 100% better. We're so far ahead now on just by saying, look, we're going to take a look at the transactions, at the deals. This is what Google does. It's the same way that Google's attribution. Look at the transaction, look at the deal, and then see how we got here. And if you can see how we got here, you will be able to say, and we contributed to this. And at some point, you can then begin to create a model for how much you contributed to new client wins versus existing client growth. But that's going to be specific to your business, and it's going to take you a while to do. But just that thing of saying, here's the wins, this is where we helped.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a different story. It's a totally different story.
Definitely. So before we go on to the last question, just for the attendees, I'm going to just flash a poll up on the screen. And if you would like to find out more about lead forensics and have a demo, just vote yes, and then we'll reach out to you and arrange that. So I'm just going to leave it on the screen for a few more seconds, and then we'll go back to the last question. Okay, so I'll just close it off now. Thank you. So Matt, finally, what is your top tip for B2B marketers listening to this episode?
I think it's the platform is not your friend. Don't trust them to set your data objectives. Their incentives. I don't mean that they are trying to trick you or anything like that, but they are incentivized to create great content, to keep their audiences on their platforms at all times. And they try and push you towards that through various methods. And they're also incentivized to sell advertising so that we can reach those audiences. So instead, start from your objectives and see what measurements there are across your entire toolbox that begin to feed into those objectives. So start with objectives, then go to key results rather than moving on the KPIs approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've come to the end of the session, so I'm going to wrap it up now. So thank you so much, Matt. That's been really insightful. Love chatting to you. And we hope that you've all enjoyed it. And we'll hope to see you on a session again soon. So thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.